Welcome back. It's sure been a wild week. Shakeups in both the Democratic and Republican fields for governor.
6 Democrats now in the race, now just 2 Republicans. Will there be more?
Good time to bring in our experts, Republican Bill McCoshen, Democrat Joe Zbecki. Gentlemen, good to see you. Welcome back to the show.
Good to be back.
Bill, let's start with this news. Bill Berrien dropping out of the race Friday. After the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel stories, was there any other path for him but this?
I don't think so. I think the campaign struggled from the jump. I don't think he found his groove. He wanted to be the outsider in the race, and there's an outsider lane on the Republican side of the aisle. But in order to fill that, you got to have unlimited resources. You got to be able to buy a base. He didn't have a base. He never did. And so I think that was the biggest issue. There were certainly some missteps over the last 120 days, and these last few, I think he realized how rough and tumble politics is and decided this isn't for him.
What does this do to the Republican primary?
I think it'll just be Shulman and Tiffany. I don't think there will be another candidate in the race. I used to think that a self-funder might get in later, but I think it'll be a two-man battle between Tiffany and Shulman. And honestly, that could change if Donald Trump endorses in this race.
We'll talk about that in a second. Joe, does this do anything to the Democratic side of things, Bill Berrien getting out?
I think it helps us focus our fire on Tom Tiffany, who is the immediate front runner for the nomination on the Republican side.
Yeah.
We saw the state Democratic Party of Wisconsin really go at him in a big way. This with Tariff Tom not doing a darn thing to stand up to Donald Trump, whose tariff policy is hurting farmers across Wisconsin. That allows us to focus our messaging efforts and try to define Mr. Tiffany, who, while he's well known in northern Wisconsin, does not have a lot of statewide name recognition. That's going to be the fight for him, is how does he introduce himself across the state? And Democrats are not going to let him do that on his own terms.
Is there a Democratic frontrunner right now?
I think Sarah Rodriguez, the current lieutenant governor, is the leader in the clubhouse at the moment. But there are others like Fran Hong, who has had a really strong announcement and rollout, who I think are trying to work their way into that first tier. And then, of course, we have a couple of big names who are still thinking about it. Current Attorney General Josh Kaul, former Lieutenant Governor Mandela Barnes. If either of them gets in, I think they're immediately in that first tier with Lieutenant Governor Sarah Rodriguez. But there's a lot to sort out with that many candidates on our side.
Bill, you're in tune with the Trump world. When we talk about endorsements, is a presidential endorsement going to be needed in the primary?
Well, I've watched all the candidates do interviews with you guys, and they all sort of waffle on that. The answer is, if he does endorse, it's the end of the primary. I think we learned that in 2022. He came in late. He endorsed Tim Michels 4 days before the primary. Michels ended up winning by 5%. So he is the 800-pound gorilla on our side of the aisle. I don't know if he will endorse. I expect he probably will. Wisconsin's pretty important. It's one of the 7 swing states. Tiffany might have an advantage on that at this point in time, and if he does, then that's probably the end of the primary.
Joe, the governor has said that he will, that he's holding off on making any endorsements for now, but he's leaving the door open. Is there a scenario that he does endorse, maybe for the primary?
I think it's pretty unlikely,
I do too.
But I'm old enough to remember that folks like former State Party Chair Ben Wickler said they were going to stay out, and then they got in. So, people change their minds. I appreciate Governor Evers just saying, like, listen, there is a scenario, but I think it's most likely that he stays out of it.
Bill, what do we make of all this chatter that Tiffany has talked about in terms of this meeting with Trump and the concerns over keeping the House? Some are viewing that as Trump didn't endorse Tiffany, and that's trouble for him.
Well, we'll see. I mean, Congressman Tony Weed has already endorsed Tom Tiffany. Congressman Scott Fitzgerald and Glenn Grothman are hosting a fundraiser for Tiffany next week, where Reince Priebus, the former head of the RNC, is the headliner. So it appears that Tiffany has been doing the work behind the scenes prior to making his announcement, including with the White House. We'll see if he's got that endorsement lined up or not.
Let's talk about that fundraiser. I mean, what should we expect from Tiffany in these first couple weeks in terms of money?
Well, he got College Republicans' endorsement instantly. I expect him to get Americans for Prosperity. I expect him to get Hunter Nation. Those are pretty good statewide networks of people on the ground. And I think he'll probably get the entire congressional delegation.
Joe, you mentioned Josh Kaul. There's a lot of talk about whether he will run, if he's going to announce, if he's not going to announce. He's really not said anything since Governor Evers announced that he was not seeking re-election. Would it be a game changer if he joins this race?
I think it might be. He would still have to earn it. Like, Josh Kaul would not be a field clearer by any stretch of the imagination. I appreciate the Attorney General taking his time to make the right decision for him and his family, right? Josh is a young guy. He's about my age. He's got a long career ahead of him and a really important job right now in court standing up to the Trump administration on countless issues. So whether or not he runs for governor, Josh Kaul has a really important role to play for my party and for the state of Wisconsin for years to come.
I'll use Tony Evers as the example. In 2018, Tony Evers won 42% in a 9-way primary, largely in part because he had won statewide prior to that 3 times. Josh Kaul has won statewide twice before, so I would instantly move him to the head of the pack if he gets in the race.
Some Democrats are seeming to get a little impatient, though. I mean, does he need to get in or out at some point?
At some point, but he has, to Bill's point, he has the name recognition. Yeah. He also has the most money sitting in a state campaign account that can be transferred over to a gubernatorial run on a moment's notice. So he has the luxury of time. And listen, I've said this before, including on this show, I don't think any of us want these campaigns to be any longer. And somebody taking their time to be like, you know what, maybe I'll run for 8 or 9 months instead of 12 or 13. I think people might respect that.
Given all the candidates in the Democratic field, is this going to turn into a race to the left?
I don't think so, because if everybody goes left, nobody's differentiating themselves from one another. So I think you will have sort of a left lane. I would think you would have more of a sort of establishment lane. You may have a moderate lane. But I also don't necessarily think that 6 or 7 candidates being in the race this year means that 6 or 7 names are on the ballot next year. You have to demonstrate your viability. You have to raise money. You have to win support. And I'm not sure all 6 or 7 of our candidates are going to be able to do that by the time nomination signatures go out.
Having run a very successful gubernatorial campaign in 1994 and participating in Tommy Thompson's election in 90, you need money, organization, and message. That's what it's going to take to win statewide for candidates on either side of this. The additional wild card on our side is what happens with Turning Point USA. That organization is growing exponentially since Charlie Kirk's death. And if they endorse in this primary, which I think they probably will, that's going to have an impact.
All right, good thing we have a year ahead still. Bill McCoshen and Joseph Becky, gentlemen, thank you.
Thank you.
Up next, those new election bills and the new reaction from the governor.